So how can we create enough good jobs for the growing supply of highly educated people that we have in the UK and other economies? What we've seen over the last 2 decades is what Richard Freeman calls the Great Doubling, a huge increase in the supply of graduates around the world, particularly from economies like China and India, which used to have very few and have seen a huge growth in their universities and colleges, and not as strong a growth in the jobs for those. And the result of that has been manifold in terms of higher levels of both unemployment and underemployment for graduates. As we look to the future, this situation looks like it could only intensify because of several trends. One is technological change. So work by Stuart Elliott at the National Academy of Sciences suggests that up to 60% of all of the work currently being done in today's knowledge economy might be better performed by machines, artificial intelligence, automation by 2030 than by humans. So that's going to pose huge challenges as we think about what things can be automated and what will the new jobs be as these things move into being done by machines. At the same time, demographics are also posing a challenge, but because of some really good news. Because of the advances we've made in healthcare, people are living longer, but they're also working longer. And so the biggest growth in the labor force is actually happening in people over 50. And that means we need to think about distributing work over a greater part of the lifespan. And we also have seen huge advances in gender equality, which means that women now, who constitute more than half of all the people who are getting degrees, are also occupying more and more of the senior leadership positions, the advanced technical positions in organizations, and competing for those good jobs, which in the past they might not have. And so we're seeing increases in the supply of people looking to fill them, but real pressures in terms of where the jobs will be. And so how do we think about ways to stimulate the growth of good jobs to match that increase in supply? Well, I think there's a couple of areas to focus on. One is within the organizations. So think about within companies, how can we restructure the workplace to create more what we would call high-performance workplaces, which are wins for the employees because they get more interesting, meaningful work, and also for the organizations because the research suggests that when you put in this bundle of high-performance practices, that actually the organization performs better. And the second part of the solution is thinking at the broader level, at the regional or national economic level, how do we stimulate or retain the supply of good jobs and create new companies, create new growth? And so let me touch on a few ways that we might think about addressing this, but with the caveat that these are very difficult policy areas because they involve the government getting involved in trying to influence the decisions that managers are making about their business strategy and how they organize their firms, which is not typically the purview of policymakers in a market-based economy like the UK or the United States. So some of the things that policymakers may want to think about in these areas are, first of all, things that we talked about in the earlier discussion of middle schools, namely, how do you create more high-skill ecosystems? How do you stimulate the development of clusters of enterprises that share a focus on a common workforce and which, working together in that area, can really compete effectively in the global economy? My research and others have suggested that often the focal point for these high-skill ecosystems is having strong universities, strong research institutions that are generating new graduates, generating new research breakthroughs that can fuel this innovation. A second thing that can be done is to address the issue of skill shortages, to foster better matching between employers and skill providers so that they're not deterred from adopting the high-performance work practices by the lack of available skills to move in that direction. One of the things that's puzzling from the research is why is it that so few organizations have moved to high-performance practices if it's convincing that once you do it, you're going to get a good economic return. The UK research suggests that only about 12% of enterprises have adopted this full cluster of practices to make that leap. Well, there's many factors that may be slowing it down. One is that it's hard to make a bunch of changes at once to team-based work, to flatter organizations, to really empowering individuals, and that managers may in fact resist that occurring. In addition, it may be that if the focus is too much on the short term, that the payoff to these practices comes from a longer term focus on actually making those performance improvements, and that may not align with what the stock market investors are asking for. And so that suggests it may also be useful to look more broadly at the full range of organizations that are out there that are creating employment. So one option for government, for the nonprofit sector, is to lead by example. Nearly 30% of the economy is in government jobs, in NHS jobs, in nonprofit jobs. Those are all jobs where there's a chance to have a direct influence, to be a model of what a high-performance work environment might look like that others might then learn from. In addition, might be worth looking at other forms of corporate organization, like B corporations or broad-based employee ownership, where workers are not just earning a wage, but they also have a stake, a direct stake in the ownership of the enterprise. My own hunch looking to the future is if we look at this intersection of trends, like technological change and automation, that what we're going to see is that we need to move toward an economy where we decouple the reliance so much on wages and jobs and having a good standard of living, and we give people both a stake in the automation, in the productivity improvements that are going to happen from this intersection of all these technologies, so that they will not resist change but actually embrace it, because everyone benefits from the productivity gains, not just the small group who owns the capital.